Hey everybody, welcome back to our weekly podcast. My name is Patrick Tan, General Counsel for ChatArgos. With me, as usual, every week, our CEO and Chief Data Scientist, Jonathan Reiter. Thanks for tuning in. This is a kind of a bonus episode because of last week's delayed podcast. And this week, we've got a whole bunch of material for you, and we also have a bit of bonus material, so we'll keep the bonus at the end. But we're going to talk a little bit about the NYAG's Galaxy / Terra-LUNA fine Mike Novogratz, yada, yada, yada. Talk about Kalshi, which is a prediction market. Kalshi versus the state of New Jersey and Kalshi versus the state of Nevada. Then we have Hyperliquid JELLY JELLY. If you don't know what that means, we will give you the lowdown on that shortly. And then a bit of bonus content, which I'm not going to mention here so that you watch to the end. Right. So let's just jump straight into it, John. I had a quick look at this, but, first of all, there's a couple of things. Let's talk about how Anthony Scaramucci says that the Martin Act shouldn't exist, and how, and this was a piece for Cointelegraph where he talks about how the NYAG lawsuit against Galaxy Digital and Mike Novogratz is lawfare.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll come to the details of the actual legal action here, but the Galaxy is a New York-based trading firm. We'll come to that one in a second. So they settled for violations of the Martin Act, which is a 1921 New York state law. So this predates essentially all modern securities regulation in the world. New York in the late 19th, early 20th century was the main place where all this stuff sort of happened. New York and London, the London market became smaller for basically World War I reasons. So these are very old laws. And yeah, the Martin Act is extremely broad. That's fair. So in this case, these things weren't registered as securities, and then Galaxy got in trouble for misrepresentation and failure to do sufficient due diligence around public statements, promoting something that was, in the view of the New York Attorney General, as security. None of those things, because they settled, went to court. There's no judgment, whatever, but the Martin Act gives the state very, very broad powers to do a lot of things there. So I sort of agree with Scaramucci that the Martin Act seems like it's too broad. The problem is that an interesting feature of the Martin Act, that people who, as Attorney General, use the Martin Act to go after a large company in a way that might look a little bit, questionable. Famously, AIG had issues to Eliot Spitzer as Attorney General. Yeah, the problem with the argument against the Martin Act there is that Eliot Spitzer then got elected governor of New York. So the people of New York, who are the ones that are ultimately responsible for the laws of New York, seem to like it. So on some level, like, even if I agree with the mooch that this seems a bit broad, the voters in New York really seem to enjoy it. And they're demonstrating that they like it in the clearest possible way, which is it empowers the Attorney General to do certain things. And when someone as Attorney General uses that power in a way that might be considered suspicious, the voters promote that person to governor. That's happened, New York Attorney General becoming governor is a thing, and people who support going after large companies in this way getting elected governor in New York has a history. Yeah, so I don't think there's a credible argument that the Martin Act is unconstitutional, particularly given that it's over 100 years old, has been tested many, 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 many times, and is sort of foundational to the structure of federal securities regulation from the Roosevelt administration. So whether or not you like it, try to get the voters to stop liking it so much.
This is one of the things that we talked about some time ago. The focus at the time, of course, was the SEC, how the SEC had regulation by enforcement, a bit of regulatory overreach and stuff like that. This is not new, but one of the things I did say was that a lot of people think that in the United States, especially if you're not from the United States, you think that there's just one generic law that covers everything in these United States, but then there's state law and stuff like that. So as the federal tide recedes, the state one starts to come up. And more state attorneys general would start to be more proactive, especially if they bring stuff like, for instance, like this one under the Martin Act, and it helps their political ambitions, such as it is.
That's somewhat particular to New York, in that New York, historically, the states had oversight over a lot of finance, and this thing's been tested a lot, and using it to go after, Hank Greenberg got somebody elected governor. So yeah. So Attorney General's elected in New York, so they're supposed to want to get elected governor because you really aren't a very good elected Attorney General if you don't want a higher job. That's the way politicians work. So,
correct. Yeah. That's not a commentary. That's just an observation of how things are.
The people in New York for 300 years have liked this kind of system. Well, not quite that long, but
that was the thing, which is why, like, obviously, if there was a lot of federal stuff, you could make an argument that, oh, okay, this is not one for the state AG. But now that the federal stuff is all taken on the back burner, you're going to see a lot of the state stuff come out. And that's worse for you in many ways.
I mean, if you don't have a connection to a state with a robust regulatory regime like this, which roughly speaking means if there's no large city in the state or no large financial services industry, there's not that many states with a, right? But New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, California, Illinois, if you don't have a connection to those places, then, maybe Texas has big cities, but not much regulatory, whatever, it's complicated.
Yeah.
So anyway, the details of the Terra Galaxy situation are that, it is, I guess, if you just take the contents of the settlement as true, it is undisputed that Galaxy was selling Terra-LUNA tokens as quickly as they were given them.
Yeah.
While they were saying it was a fantastic investment. There's not necessarily anything wrong with that, because if you've given a guy money and there's a long unlock schedule in which you're getting the tokens back, but you need to disclose, there should be disclosure requirements around that stuff if these things are securities, as they've kind of agreed that they were. Similarly, and this is more of a professional thing that it doesn't really apply to individuals, they didn't do due diligence on whether or not the claims they were making were accurate. So you described some of this earlier as the Costanza defense, right? So as a person, sometimes I didn't know, I thought it was true, but it was wrong, does work as a defense. But if you're a licensed professional, whatever, financial services type of an operator, being wrong, unless you made a sufficient effort to investigate things, is itself not allowed. Right. So you're allowed to make mistakes, but you have to have made a reasonable effort to research things first. You can't just take Do Kwon's word for it, in this case, that the Chai Payments Network was doing like 6% of all payments in Korea. You have to verify that that's true, particularly if it sounds plausible. So it's not, oh, well, he told me. Right. If you say, I heard from this guy this is happening, that's fine. That's a true statement. But just asserting it's happening requires some research. And it seems like admitted that research didn't happen. They're not pretending that they did research and made a mistake. They just didn't do the research. In one case, it seemed like someone was specifically assigned the task of doing the research and just didn't do it. If that resulted in my employer being fined $200 million, I would imagine it would be hard to find another job. But
for those who are not fans of the show, the Costanza defense refers to an episode from Seinfeld where George Costanza says, "Just remember, Jerry, it's not a lie if you believe it."
Yeah.
So,
I mean, which has some echoes of truth here. This is really an extreme version where, because you're under the Martin Act, these things they've agreed are securities, and the nature of these sort of deemed to exist securities contracts is that other requirements come in above and beyond standard common law fraud type statutes.
Right. So, this Kalshi and Kalshi one, man, I got to tell you,
and this is particularly relevant to crypto because while some of this is just about betting, there's nothing to do with blockchains. The regulatory environment in these types of arguments are identical. And these are the types of conflicts and contradictions that are starting to bubble to the surface.
All right, so a little bit of background about Kalshi and Kalshi. Kalshi is just basically a prediction market. They take basically betting contracts. What's the equivalent of betting contracts and a whole bunch of stuff. They take action on a whole bunch of stuff.
And elections, political stuff,
but also sports. And well, tell us about their preemptive actions against the state of New Jersey and the state of Nevada.
Okay, so I think we'll start by saying they have previously in a number of legal whatever cases argued that there's a difference between betting on things like elections and things like sports, and that they shouldn't be regulated somewhat in the same way, and that they require exemptions, and that what they're doing shouldn't be banned by laws that ban sports betting. Mm-hmm. At core, the argument is the election's going to happen whether or not there's any betting. It's an important event that's going to happen and matters, and we're not influencing, right? Whereas the sports kind of, when you have leagues that are sponsored by the betting companies, they at least in part exist because of people wanting to watch them for entertainment and bet on them and doing the rest of it. The election isn't happening so that people can bet on it, right? The elections in the vast majority of the world happen because of, the government system, and the people want there to be a democracy, whatever, and there's voting. Fine. And they have a reasonable point that betting on a sporting event that might not exist were it not for betting and TV advertising is different than betting on an election that presumably will exist whether or not there's television advertising and, DraftKings or whatever, these kind of things exist in sponsor sports teams. So fair enough, those are not identical.
Yeah,
I can accept that those are
Yeah,
not identical. Now, so they've got themselves some kind of a CFTC arrangement. That's fine. And then a whole bunch of sporting events happen in states in the United States, and they now have a dispute with New Jersey and Nevada. It's not a coincidence that New Jersey and Nevada are the two states that have gambling commissions and large numbers of casinos for a long time. And the issue is essentially that what they're doing doesn't comply with the in-state sports betting type laws that exist. Right. So they're now a little bit stuck because in the states, just like sort of the converse of what we said earlier regarding if you're in a state that doesn't have a big financial services regulatory infrastructure, nobody's going to come after you. In a lot of the Midwest, there isn't, or the West, there isn't much of that stuff. But trying to do betting in a way that isn't compliant with the New Jersey and Nevada, extremely well-tested, old, subjects of movies, usually not movies that are positive on how, non-organized crime some of this stuff is, but the 70s. There are structures there that you need to follow, and they can't just say, oh, well, we have this other license, so we're good. Right? Particularly if you've argued that license applies to your identifying of truth and objective events in the real world as opposed to sports that exist for, an NCAA tournament that's occurring in New Jersey may cause you some problems. So they're a little bit stuck now. I don't know how this is going to work.
This is equivalent. I mean, one of the lines that really struck me was how they said that, in a nutshell, this isn't a casino. This isn't a sports off-track betting, an OTB. It's a truth machine. Okay, that's one way to look at it. I mean, I think when the feds bust down what looks like a couple of poker tables and you're taking a rake and stuff like that, and you go, no, this is a truth machine.
And that's the argument that in that case, right, people who are playing cards, the activity exists only to facilitate the betting because that is the entertainment. Right? Playing poker, not betting for money, is a thing that small kids do, I suppose, to pass time, but just isn't an interesting activity. Whereas participating in the political process of, you could bet on what the weather is tomorrow. The betting isn't going to influence the weather.
Yeah.
Right? Those are different things. And there are well-developed, just like we just said with the Martin Act, there are well-developed regulatory regimes for these types of gambling in New Jersey and Nevada for a long time. I mean, I don't know in the 1970s if this podcast existed, if we'd be advocating for how great those gambling commissions and the boxing commissions are. They were all completely mafia run at the time. You can Google. But that's all fine now. They're all large companies, whatever. It's okay. So they need to comply with those rules, and they seem a bit boxed in. The argument that you want to run stuff on real-world events is fine, but don't try to extend it to sports using the same logic. The judge is going to figure out
that's
the
very
difference here.
disingenuous. Yeah. I thought that those arguments were it's interesting. I as an attorney, I wouldn't attempt that, but that's, sure.
Yeah.
Why not?
You're not, your election isn't sponsored by the, who sponsors sporting events for advertising. There's no advertising dollar sponsoring this election. That's not how it works.
Well, maybe there will be.
Different things.
This has been an interesting year so far.
But, I mean, in general, the stuff that will occur independent of the betting doesn't have advertising, whereas sports run on advertising. Everybody knows that.
This candidate brought to you by Budweiser.
Yeah, I mean, boxers are sponsored by beer brands, and candidates are
not.
It's different.
Generally,
it's different. Yeah, so they may be a little bit screwed in that the sports betting market is huge. There's a lot of money, and I can see people wanting to get in on it. And the argument that you're sort of looking for the truth, and that's why your platform exists. The truth isn't that this football match is going to be settled by the point spread. Like, that's just not an objective truth in the same way. So.
All right, so moving on. Hyperliquid Jelly Jelly. You want to break that down for us, John?
Yeah, okay. So we've talked about Hyperliquid before. Hyperliquid is a blockchain. I think what type of layer it is and whether or not it's decentralized depends on who you ask. There's an argument to be made it's a layer 1 centralized blockchain. There's an argument to be made it's a layer 3 thing with limited amounts of guardrails and control, whatever. So it's a blockchain that you access off of Arbitrum, which is kind of strange, but it also is closed source, and it's not really clear exactly who runs all of it and how some of it works. It does provide limited transparency. And there's been discussions for quite a while about how, there's an argument. Their main product is perpetual futures trading. The main argument has been that this is just a bunch of people running a closed source perpetual futures trading platform, which is just a centralized exchange, right? Then you can deposit without any KYC or anything, and that's obviously got problems, right? Because you can't run a futures exchange with global access and no KYC. You're then violating the laws in many, many countries. And there's no dispute that if it's a centralized perpetual futures exchange, it's doing that. Some people claim it's not a centralized perpetual futures exchange. Well, there have been a number of mild scandals associated with Hyperliquid. And in this particular case, they had a token, it's supposed to be permissionless decentralized perps, right? A token was just forced delisted because there was some manipulation and a loss and whatever. The details of the trading don't really matter. What matters is that what was considered by the team to be unacceptable behavior occurred, and then some people and products and whatnot were effectively expelled from the platform, which demonstrates that they have central control over the platform because they could do that. This isn't a situation like there was a DAO voting and, 90% of the DAO voted this. No. This was just an announcement and a change in code you can't read. They just delisted and ejected this thing. So, case settled, centralized exchange. Fine. So, a lot of times people ask whether or not centralization matters. So, this is the Hyperliquid main deposit address on Arbitrum. So this is where the USDC that are funding the perps trading, whatever, sit. It's the simplest way of looking at flows of funds in and around Hyperliquid. So you can see here for a long time, money was coming in, whatever, and then this is, get the dates on the screen here. This is late 2024. They started November, December, really ramping up to about a $2 billion float that's in there. And then it peaked, not coincidentally, this is around the Bybit hack type whatever stuff, and then you've got a big leg down here and a big leg down here from these delistings, right? So you've got 250 million or so coming out. So what you can see is that definitely concerns around bad actor use, centralization, the usage of central whatever control to expel people does actually impact people's opinion of the platform. So this is flows for the last couple of days. This is the Jelly whatever delisting incident. So you can see it's about a $250 million net outflow of sort of cash on the platform. I guess it's the amount of money at the casino in that sense. So what's interesting to note here is that, so these different colors here, the bars represent sort of inflows, outflows, numbers of inflows, numbers of outflows, and sort of average sizes of those things. So this is, I think, the total outflow here. So on this day, 334 million came out, and the inflow was 150 million. Right? So people are still putting money in. So the green and blue are inflow, outflow. And what you see is they're roughly balanced, right? They're roughly balanced over time. And following this incident, there was a substantial outflow, right? And you can get big moves down when the inflow doubles and the outflow goes up by a factor of 6. That's roughly what happened here. You can see these are reasonable numbers of transactions, thousands of transactions, right? Number of inflows, outflows. So this day there's 3,000 of each, and here there, it's a larger number, doubled and tripled amounts. So just a couple more flows than normal and slightly bigger flows. So this is a case where certainly centralization matters more than zero. Number hasn't kept going up and to the right. We'll see if this is the beginning of a leg back down to zero or what happens here. But it's an interesting, visual representation. You can also see Hyperliquid's only been in the news for a couple of months, how long this thing was sort of operating at smaller size. Clearly there was no, so these are also deposit withdrawal, whatever type numbers. So I guess they were on hiatus here for a while. I don't know what they were doing. There's no, it's a flat line, old GUSD market cap style. But, activities resumed again. You can see it's mostly one way, right? Mostly money coming in, the green little deposits out. So there's flow through here, but so they've probably got themselves a real problem because they've now admitted that they control the platform, which tends to not be great. But, there you go.
All right, now for the bonus content. Our good old friend FDUSD. Gotta miss that.
We've been on the True Dollar and then the first digital dollar for a long time. I started writing on the True Dollar in 2021, where the original True Dollar is this questionable piece of. So what we're going to look at here. Okay, so the True Dollar is a product that's existed for a very long time, 2017 or 18.
Yeah.
And then it was purchased by a confused Asian conglomerate called Tekterax. Previous podcast, we've talked about this a bit. End of 2020, operationally taken over in 2021. It was sort of acknowledged to be Justin Sun affiliated, I think, in 2024. Around the time that blew up, the first digital dollar appeared and started as a new stablecoin, mostly affiliated with Binance, and the first digital trust company that runs it was a trust company associated with the True Dollar. So these products are somewhat linked. Now, a few days ago, Justin Sun announced that there were some court filings that the True Dollar had a couple $100 million vanish in some ARIA commodity trading fund. Previously talked about the U.S. SEC settled with the True people regarding lying around losses related to the ARIA commodity trading fund, and that he needed to prop the thing up with a couple $100 million. And several of the people associated with the investment process into that fund are affiliated with First Digital and had been making noise about how First Digital, the Hong Kong trust company that runs FDUSD, is insolvent, is a problem, whatever. So we're going to try to untangle a little bit of that now. Just going to look at a little bit of data for a second before we start that. So this is recent activity in FDUSD, and you can see that it was pretty snooze mode here for a while, and then something happened. Something happened right here. In fact, these transfers are, I forget which exchange those are, whatever, something happened there. And then similarly, True Dollar, something happened here. So in this case, actually, it was HitBTC. I think it was HitBTC, it's the exchange, wiping small amounts out of thousands of deposit addresses, hundreds of deposit addresses that were holding like $50 type amounts. Something interesting probably happened there. I'm not exactly sure. The court filings are a few days before, a few days after that. This one's been low market cap snooze mode for a while. Okay, so we've got a stable coin that people have recently become interested in, and a stable coin where the Justin Sun Group had to provide a roughly $500 million swing loan to return solvency. So what happened here? Okay, so this, we're going to sort of generically reference. This comes from court cases in Hong Kong and Singapore. Tweeted some of this. Everything we're going to say now is public record.
Yeah.
There is more information that will come out that I assume will be on the public record at some point, but let's stick to what's on the public record now. So historically, the True Dollar folks were investing, in the long past, they were just, I think, bank accounts and treasury bills. Right? They began to invest, it's a guy named Alex de Lorraine, who is still on Twitter and is named in the court papers, so was the person in charge of making investment decisions at the True Dollar. And he was convinced by a couple of fund-type salespeople who work for companies in Hong Kong and Singapore to invest in this ARIA commodity fund. And he put $90-something million of their reserves into the ARIA commodity fund. That money essentially disappeared, and there was an SEC settlement regarding their lying about that, about where the money went, how much money they had. And we know from court filings that by 2022, which is about a year and a half into Justin Sun's group operating the True Dollar, that they tried to withdraw money from that fund, and the fund couldn't give them the money back. So by, I believe it was August 2022, it's documented that the investments Alex de Lorraine made went south, and they were out at least tens of millions of dollars and couldn't make payments to people. So they were aware of insolvency from that point. People who used the product were able to tell that they were insolvent because transactions that used to work for withdrawals and whatnot stopped functioning for large sizes because they were insolvent. Now, when the Justin Sun Group took the thing over, they put in place an arrangement. So this Tecterex entity that whatever controls, it's eventually Justin Sun. Anyway, the Justin Sun guys have given them the swing loan in the end, so they appear to have been in charge. They continued to delegate sort of investment authority to this Alex Lorraine guy, and he was still speaking to the same investment advisors, one of whom, Vincent Chock, is the guy that runs First Digital Trust, the First Digital Dollar, and there's a Thai guy whose name it's a Thai surname, Yai, whatever. And they continued to direct, I think it's about $450 million of investment of money that went into True Dollar into this same ARIA commodity fund, which appears to be gone. So you can find that fund. They've made a lot of investments. This is court documents and other public filings in various frontier market, African mining operations and, frontier market type stuff that even the ARIA market guys quoted in some news saying these are not liquid investments. We were clear these were not liquid investments.
Yep.
I'm not aware of any allegation that these guys were misrepresenting an investment in a, natural resource extraction project in Africa as an appropriate liquid investment for stablecoin reserves. Right? There's definitely a cross wire somewhere. There are allegations that substantial commissions and fees were taken by some of the intermediaries along the way. There are 8-figure amounts stated in court papers. Whether or not that's accurate, we're not going to be presenting bank statements on this podcast, but let's assume it's accurate because they're Hong Kong and Singapore-based businesses in Hong Kong and Singapore courts that presumably can get bank statements from Hong Kong and Singapore. So in the end, the Justin Sun folks had put hundreds of millions of dollars into True Dollar, and it ended up in this ARIA commodity fund that appears to be gone, at least partially gone. And we know that the True folks have settled with the U.S. government, admitting that this money, related amounts, whatever money had disappeared. So it seems pretty safe to say that money's been relocated, right? It's sitting in someone's bank account.
I believe
presumably,
it's called trousered.
Realistically, it may just be sitting in the infrastructure that was set up for mineral extraction in some places, and whatever. That's a separate set of conversations about what these ARIA commodity trading folks were actually doing. Whatever. Now, the guy that ran some of these investment advisors that were advising Lorraine, this guy who worked for TrueFi back forever, are also affiliated with First Digital and some other financial intermediaries there. But this has nothing to do directly with First Digital, right?
No, yeah.
I've yet to see any evidence that First Digital itself has a problem with their reserves. What I see is that the management of First Digital, which was already known to have a somewhat checkered past, advised a sibling company of a First Digital Trust customer to make some investments that went sour. Right? Every investment advisor recommends people to invest in stuff, some of which goes down because if you're an investment advisor for any period of time, of course,
some stuff is going to go bad.
Whether that's malicious or not or whatever is a separate conversation, but these are all people who've been doing stuff for decades. So the idea there are some aggrieved customers is just par for the course. It doesn't mean anything. Some of their past is, maybe more aggrieved customers than average, but whatever. It's finance. That doesn't necessarily mean much. So I don't know, and I've yet to see any evidence put forth by Justin Sun and company that First Digital itself has a problem. They're still publishing lists of, bank account balances and treasury bills and whatnot for the fund. So unless those are just straight up lies, that token looks to be fine. That company shouldn't be liable for mistakes made by another company, even if they have the same management.
Yeah.
But then who knows if they're really all subsidiaries of the same parent company or who's guaranteed what. Given that this Alex Lorraine guy made almost $100 million in bad investments and was told, just keep going because they hadn't, I guess, noticed the problem or whatever, you kind of have to question how much useful oversight's going on at any of these places. Look, maybe that fund ended up investing in businesses affiliated with the investors in the first place, and Terex is really the recipient. Who knows? We're not, we can't go full circle on that one. But it doesn't seem like there's a direct allegation First Digital has a solvency problem. There's an allegation they have a solvency problem. There doesn't seem to be any substance to that.
Yeah.
The claim seems to be the people who run this company were the advisors on investments that went south for this other thing. Give me my money back. And now, if it turns out that First Digital is claiming they're in T-bills, but they're actually in this ARIA commodity fund.
That could be a problem.
And then I think we don't normally give legal conclusions on the podcast, but I think it's then safe to say that these people who are sitting in Hong Kong running Hong Kong-based regulated businesses are going to prison in Hong Kong.
Well, there'll be problems.
But there's no evidence.
There's no evidence to that
happening.
at all. Yeah. No.
It's of course possible. I don't have their stack of T-bills over here. I have a copy of their PDF. So we'll find out. I don't know whether, some of this is something of a difference between sort of Eastern and Western business conglomerate attitudes, where parts of the conglomerate are expected to pay off debts of other parts of the conglomerate. That's more common in Asian business setup than it is in Western Hemisphere business setup, right? Where limited liability is much stricter.
Yeah, but here, where you could get one company in the group to basically take over the liabilities of a different group company, and and there's strong legal precedent for that kind of
That's
thing.
it. Yeah. There's
It's
a
a
lot
thing.
more.
It's a thing.
Limited liability is less strong. Now, whether these things are affiliated businesses, I mean, famously, again, this is way outside the crypto space, but people can look at the Vijay Mallya Kingfisher Airlines stuff in India, where there's no question that the businesses themselves were independent entities with limited liability, but the response of the financial system was essentially, yeah, okay, but they're all yours, so you're kind of cross-responsible, and that is the way it works to some extent in these places. So whether this is an attempt to extract money from one business to cover the losses of another that, strictly speaking, they're not on the hook for, but by convention they're on the hook for, or if they think they can pierce the veil, whatever. That gets into it.
I have found that at least in this time zone, they are quite willing to pierce the corporate veil, especially in instances of fraud or some kind of malfeasance.
The standards are certainly lower than North America, where a chemical company will overtly set up subsidiaries for their asbestos liabilities, transfer everything there, and have it go bankrupt, and there's never any clawbacks against the parent company.
Yeah.
That's normal in the United States, and that is just not the way that stuff generally works in other parts of the world. So.
Right. And on that optimistic note, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all your likes, comments, and subscribes. We appreciate that. Helps the algorithm, helps us to get this content out to other people who might be interested as well. We may be broadcasting from Romania next week, so look after that. Otherwise, we will see you in about a week or so. And have a great weekend. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.